For years, Europe and the United States stood together as allies, bound by trust and shared security. Today, that trust is under serious strain. President Trump's push over Greenland has triggered open resistance from European leaders and raised an unthinkable question. Can NATO survive internal pressure? When allies start fearing each other's power, peace itself becomes fragile. This is not just a political clash, it is a test of the Western alliance. Subscribe for clear, unbiased geopolitical analysis.
Once again, Greenland returns to the center of international debate. An island frozen by geography but heated by politics, US President Donald Trump has reopened the idea of annexing it to the United States, reigniting tensions between Washington and Copenhagen.
We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it.
Greenland looks quiet on the map, but in reality it sits at the heart of a fast-changing world. It lies between North America and Europe, right across the Arctic routes that are becoming more important every year as ice melts. Ships moving between Asia, Europe, and the United States are watching these waters closely. This is why Greenland is no longer just ice and snow. It has become a strategic doorway. The United States already operates the Pituffik Space Base, once called Thule Air Base, which plays a major role in missile warning systems and space surveillance. From a military view, this land matters. From a global power view, it matters even more. But the phrase national security carries enormous weight, and that is exactly why it is dangerous when used loosely. History shows that powerful nations often frame expansion as protection. When security becomes the main argument, smaller nations are pushed into a corner where their rights appear secondary. Greenland may be vast in land but small in population, and that imbalance creates vulnerability. Europe understands this deeply. If security alone justifies control, then borders stop being firm lines and become temporary obstacles. The Arctic is also rich in rare earth mineral, oil potential, and future shipping lanes. Control here means influence tomorrow. This turns Greenland into a prize, not a partner. That is why this debate feels heavier than past discussions. It is not about cooperation, it is about ownership. And when security becomes an excuse, sovereignty becomes the first victim.
President Trump has suggested the U.S. could take action against other countries following the capture of Nicolas Maduro. He's named Colombia, Mexico, and even Cuba. Our Brett Neese takes a closer look at the threats and how the countries are reacting.
Tonight, President Trump sending a clear message to Cuba after the U.S.'s operation in Venezuela.
I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down. It's going down for the count.
Congressman Carlos Jimenez echoing the president's statement.
When President Trump is saying, that he has his eyes on Cuba next, not so much about direct action, but the fact that regime is actually collapsing under its own weight.
Cuba, just one of many countries the president is now ramping up pressure on. He says Mexico needs to take action against the cartels.
We'd love Mexico to do it. They're capable of doing it, but unfortunately the cartels are very strong in Mexico.
Just one day after that operation in Venezuela, President Trump also not ruling out an operation in Colombia in response to the drug trafficking in that country.
It sounds good to me. Yeah. You know why? Because they kill a lot of people.
The president not stopping there with renewed calls to take over Greenland.
We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place.
The Danish Prime Minister weighed in on those remarks about Greenland, saying that any U.S. military action there would effectively mark the end of NATO. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says that she and her country reject any sort of U.S. intervention there. And Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, said in response to President Trump, quote, "Come get me." But meanwhile, the president has not made it clear what actions in any of these countries.
This single line reveals a much larger pattern. Greenland did not appear suddenly in isolation. Over recent years, pressure has been applied across different regions using the same logic: stability, security, and control. From strong rhetoric toward Venezuela to threats involving Cuba, from demands placed on Mexico to sharp language directed at Colombia, a clear method emerges. Power is projected first through words, then through pressure, and finally through consequences. European leaders are not reacting only to Greenland. They are reacting to the direction this mindset points toward. Today it is Greenland. Tomorrow it could be another place whose location or resources are labeled too important to ignore. That fear is not emotional, it is rational. Once the idea spreads that strength decides borders, every nation begins to feel smaller. Diplomacy works slowly. It requires patience and compromise. Power projection works fast. but it leaves scars. Europe's concern grows because threats toward Canada and Mexico have already crossed traditional language lines. Talking about turning Canada into a 51st state or applying heavy pressure on neighbors sends a signal that respect is conditional. Allies begin to wonder if friendship still offers protection. This is why Greenland alarms Europe. It sits under Denmark's sovereignty, and Denmark is part of a wider alliance built on trust. If one piece moves by force or pressure, the whole structure shakes. The question echoing quietly across capitals is simple but chilling. If Greenland today, then who tomorrow?
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen issued a direct statement to Washington, stressing that Greenland is not for sale, and that any talk of US control over the island crosses the red lines of sovereignty.
Those words mark a turning point. Denmark's response is firmer than before because the stakes are higher than ever. Sovereignty is not just a political term. It is the foundation of international law. It means borders are respected, decisions are made by the people who live there, and power does not override consent. If that rule bends once, it weakens everywhere. Greenland is not an empty land waiting for direction. It has its own government, its own elections, and a strong indigenous Inuit identity. Self-rule is not symbolic. It is lived reality. Any discussion about its future without its people at the center creates moral and legal conflict. Europe recognizes this, especially after witnessing how border violations elsewhere have led to prolonged instability. Denmark understands that silence would be seen as weakness. That is why the message is clear and public. This is not negotiation territory. It is a line drawn to protect a system that has kept relative peace for decades. The firmness is not aggression. It is defense of principle. The tension now hangs in the air. Words have been exchanged. Positions are fixed. Trust is under strain. If Denmark says no, what happens when Trump doesn't listen?
Now, even before President Trump took the stage in Davos, world leaders at the Economic Forum, they stood firm against the possibility of the U.S. taking control of Greenland. Here's Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
We stand firmly with Greenland and Denmark and fully support their unique right to determine Greenland's future. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
These words land like a warning bell, not just for Greenland, but for the entire global system built after the Second World War. Canada's position matters deeply here, because it is not a distant observer. It is an Arctic nation, a NATO member, and a close ally of both Europe and the United States. When Canada speaks about rupture, it is describing a moment where old rules stop working the way they used to. A transition suggests gradual change. A rupture means something has broken. In the Arctic, geography does not forgive mistakes. Melting ice is opening new routes, creating new competition, and exposing weak points in global security. Canada understands that if power decides ownership in the Arctic, no northern nation is truly safe. That is why support for Greenland is also self-defense. The deeper issue is how pressure is applied. Tariffs, supply chains, and economic threats are no longer side tools. They are becoming primary weapons. When trade turns into leverage, cooperation turns into fear. Europe and Canada see this clearly. If economic strength replaces mutual respect, alliances become fragile contracts instead of shared commitments. This moment feels dangerous because it signals a shift away from rules toward raw influence. Once that shift begins, it does not stop at one island. It spreads quietly, then suddenly.
Alors vaste sujet, et au fond, il pourrait y avoir un côté complètement naïf, irénique, à vous dire qu'on va s'occuper de la gouvernance internationale au moment où je suis en train de vous dire que c'est le désordre le plus grand, la loi du plus fort, et que chaque jour les gens se demandent si le Groenland va être envahi, si le Canada sera soumis à la menace de devenir le 51e État ou autre, ou si Taïwan sera encerclé davantage. Les États-Unis sont une puissance établie mais qui se détourne progressivement de certains de ses alliés et s'affranchit de règles internationales qu'elle promouvait encore récemment, qu'il s'agisse du commerce, de certains éléments de sécurité ou de certaines enceintes.
The messages that we hear regarding Greenland are extremely concerning, and we have had discussions also among the Europeans. If this is a real threat, and if it is, then what would be our response?
Es ist vollkommen klar, über das Schicksal Grönlands entscheiden die Grönländerinnen und Grönländer und das Königreich Dänemark, zu dessen Hoheitsgebiet Grönland gehört. Die in der UN-Charta festgeschriebenen Prinzipien der Souveränität, der territorialen Integrität und der Unverletzlichkeit der Grenzen müssen.
This fear is not exaggeration, it is memory. Europe remembers what happens when borders become flexible. The shadow of Ukraine looms large here. When force challenges sovereignty, the damage lasts generations. Roads break, trust collapses, and peace becomes fragile. That is why Europe reacts not only with policy, but with emotion. This is personal. The idea that borders might shift because a stronger country demands it cuts deep into Europe's history. Families, cities, and identities were once torn apart by that thinking. The promise after those wars was simple: borders would be protected, not negotiated under pressure. This is why Greenland resonates so strongly. It is not about ice. It is about precedent. If one territory can be pressured today, another can be pressured tomorrow. The fear spreads quietly through capitals, not as panic, but as calculation. Emotion here is not weakness. It is awareness shaped by pain. Europe knows that once force enters the conversation, diplomacy becomes decoration. That is why voices are firm, unified, and unusually direct.
French President Emmanuel Macron has sent what he called a private message to U.S. President Donald Trump, offering to host a surprise G7-style meeting in Paris. The message, later shared publicly by Trump, proposed a summit on January 22nd where Russia could be invited on the sidelines, alongside Ukraine and Denmark. Macron's outreach comes amid rising tensions following Trump's threat to impose new tariffs on European countries over his push to acquire Greenland. In the message, Macron addressed Trump as "my friend," stressing alignment on Syria and suggesting cooperation on Iran despite disagreements elsewhere. Macron told Trump he did not understand what the US president was doing on Greenland, calling the issue a source of growing friction. The French president proposed inviting Ukrainians, Danes, Syrians, and Russians to parallel discussions around the G7 meeting. He also extended a personal invitation for Trump to have dinner with him in Paris before returning to Washington. Moreover, Trump also shared a screenshot of a message from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, praising Trump and saying he was committed to finding a path forward on Greenland. Trump posted screenshots of the exchange on his Truth Social platform, though his own replies were not visible in the shared images. The post came as European leaders prepared emergency talks in Brussels following Trump's renewed tariff threats. Those threats target 8 European countries and are framed by Trump as leverage over the European Union's stance on Greenland.
This language changes everything. Allies are not shocked by ambition. They are shocked by tone. When choice is removed, partnership disappears. For decades, NATO has survived because members believed protection was mutual and respect was real. Words like these place that belief under stress. NATO is not just a military structure. It is a promise. If one member feels threatened by another member's pressure, the promise weakens. Denmark's position inside NATO makes this moment especially sensitive. An alliance built to prevent coercion now faces it from within. Trust is fragile. It takes years to build and seconds to damage. Statements that sound strong at home sound alarming abroad. They raise doubts about reliability, intention, and future behavior. Once doubt enters an alliance, unity becomes performance instead of conviction. Europe's fear is not immediate war. It is slow erosion of trust.
First, let me recall the President's statement where she said, "We stand firm in our commitment to uphold the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. We will always protect our strategic, economic and security interests. We will face these challenges to our European solidarity with steadiness and resolve." End quote. Now let me emphasise that intensive consultations are ongoing among EU leaders. President Costa has indicated the likelihood of an extraordinary European Council this week to tackle this very subject. It's clear from the consultations among EU leaders, including President von der Leyen, that the priority here is to engage, not escalate, and avoid the imposition of tariffs. Why? Because this will ultimately harm consumers and businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. The EU has consistently underlined its shared transatlantic interest in peace and security in the Arctic, including through NATO.
These words signal preparation, not panic. Europe is quietly making it clear that it has options if pressure turns into action. Economic tools sit at the center of that response. Tariffs, regulatory barriers, and coordinated trade measures are powerful because they touch daily life. When trade is disrupted, prices rise, jobs feel uncertain, and supply chains slow down, ordinary people feel the impact first, long before leaders shake hands again. Escalation never stays controlled. A trade dispute between large economies ripples outward, hitting farmers, small businesses, and consumers on both sides of the Atlantic. Products cost more. Investment hesitates. Trust between markets weakens. Europe understands this, which is why its tone mixes firmness with caution. The goal is not punishment. The goal is deterrence. But once lines are crossed, momentum takes over. Political pride becomes involved. Compromise looks like surrender. That is when damage multiplies. Escalation hurts allies more than rivals, because shared systems are deeply connected. The deeper the integration, the sharper the pain. This is the real danger. Not immediate conflict, but slow economic harm that feeds public anger. And public anger reshapes politics. When that happens, repairing relationships takes years, not months.
Greenland is not for sale and will never be owned by the USA. Greenland will not be governed by the USA. Greenland will not be a part of the United States of America. We choose the Greenland we know today, which is an integrated part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Now, we are currently confronting a strategic geopolitical crisis, and if we have to choose between the USA and Denmark here and now, we choose Denmark. We choose NATO. We choose the Kingdom of Denmark. We choose the European Union. This is certainly not the time for internal political discussions and domestic division. This is the time to stand united and firm together and build on the community we know and the one we want. That's why we go into the room together, we leave together, and we engage in dialogue with the American people together. Greenland, as part of the Kingdom of Denmark, is a member of NATO. We have an immense amount of unwavering confidence in the NATO alliance. And we know that NATO fully supports and stands behind us in this situation. But the support from Europe and Denmark is also vital, absolutely crucial in this particular.
This statement carries weight, because it comes from identity, not strategy. Greenland's people are not a bargaining chip. They are a community with history, culture, and democratic voice. Indigenous Inuit identity sits at the heart of this resistance. Decisions about land are decisions about life, tradition, and future generations. Forcing control over such a place would backfire immediately. Moral authority matters in global politics. When power ignores consent, legitimacy collapses. Allies hesitate. Neutral countries distance themselves. Even supporters grow uncomfortable. Influence gained through pressure fades faster than influence earned through respect. Democratic choice is powerful because it speaks quietly but firmly. It does not need threats. It stands on principle. That principle resonates across Europe because it mirrors their own values. Borders exist to protect people, not to tempt ambition. Raw power can seize land, the moment people feel ruled instead of respected. Resistance begins. That resistance may start peacefully, but it never ends quietly. In this struggle, moral clarity becomes a shield stronger than military strength.
We have over 90 Inuit here from Inuit Nunangat in Canada to help celebrate. And we just want to show just how much in solidarity we are with Inuit in Greenland and Greenland generally.
The flag raising symbolizing the beginning of a permanent diplomatic presence in the Danish territory at a time when its sovereignty is being threatened by the United States.
This is not just the opening of a building, but a further strengthening of the friendship and cooperation between Greenland and Canada.
We will stand together with the people of Greenland and Denmark on many issues, on defense and security, on economic resilience and bilateral ties.
Symbols matter. A flag, a building, a presence on the ground all send messages without shouting. Canada and France opening diplomatic missions is not theater. It is reassurance. It tells Greenland that it is not isolated. It tells Europe that unity is real. And it tells Washington that pressure will be met with solidarity. Europe is closing ranks carefully but clearly. Cooperation replaces fear. Presence replaces silence. These moves are defensive, not provocative. When allies stand together, the cost of forcing issues rises sharply. Isolation becomes the real risk. Influence weakens when friends step back. History shows that even the strongest powers struggle alone. The future of the Arctic will be shaped by cooperation or conflict. One path leads to shared security. The other leads to endless tension. The choice made here will echo far beyond ice and maps. If America pushes too hard, it may find itself standing alone. The question now is simple but heavy. Is Greenland about security, or about power in a world that no longer trusts power alone? If you found this analysis valuable, share your thoughts, join the discussion, and stay connected for deeper conversations ahead.